You have to understand when you see something like this that a concussion is a true brain injury. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and understandably, I've gotten a lot of questions and concerns about what exactly happened here tonight to Chargers tight end Donald Parham. First off here, this response that we saw from Parham, where his arms were basically locked and sort of appeared to be stuck in this position, this is a sign of a brain injury. This is a sign of a concussion. It's something we refer to as a sort of fencing response. We'll get to Joe Buck's comments here in a minute, but this isn't speculation. This fencing response is something that was actually added to the NFL's concussion protocols to observe as a sign or evidence of a concussion or a brain injury. Essentially, because of the brain injury, your body sends these automatic signals down the nerves to cause your muscles to contract into this tonic posture that we sort of exemplify with this kind of fencing response, as we call it. This whole sequence is an important lesson to the fact that we truly can't judge the severity of a concussion or a head injury just based on how hard there's helmet-to-helmet contact or how hard somebody gets hit. As Parham is going to the ground here, basically his head snaps backwards and you get this whiplash type effect where the brain goes from being relatively stable in the skull to then all of a sudden as the head hits on the turf, now the skull is stationary, the brain is still moving, and so the brain is rotating, moving backwards, basically sloshing up in the spinal fluid and contacting the inside of the skull, distributing this high impact force throughout the brain. It triggers this neurochemical cascade, this massive depolarization that, if severe enough, can cause the unconsciousness, causes the symptoms and signs of a concussion, and can cause this type of fencing response. As our brain develops after we're born, we initially have these things we call primitive reflexes. They're automatic. It's these automatic signals that are generated in our brain to do things like protect a baby whenever they fall. One of these reflexes is called this ATNR, or this asymmetric tonic neck reflex, where basically the arm gets extended out away from the body based on kind of the position of the head. It's, again, this sort of protective mechanism in the event of somebody falling. The arm goes out to sort of help protect yourself. We think that these reflexes originate somewhere in the brainstem, in specifically what we call these vestibular nuclei. So the areas of the brainstem that help to control our balance, our awareness. So if we sense that we're falling through our vestibular system, there's this immediate reflex to put our arms out to help protect ourselves. In the case of a bad enough head injury that's affected that part of our brain, you can sort of bring back this primitive reflex that triggers this automatic pathway in the brain to cause your arms to get flexed upwards into this kind of protective position in this form of what we call tonic posturing, sometimes referred to as this sort of fencing response. The rest of this whole sequence was basically to help protect his cervical spine. You can see here how they've removed his face mask. They do this in case they need to access the airway if somebody goes into cardiac arrest. Essentially, when an athlete is down and unconscious, you assume the worst. You treat it as if they could have a neck injury. You protect their spine, you immobilize them on a backboard, and get them to the hospital. Let's take a quick listen then to what Joe Buck was saying later on in the game.
I will just add this. It is very cold, at least by Los Angeles standards, down on the field, and hopefully that was more the issue than anything else. But we'll wait and find out.
This was completely inappropriate for Joe Buck to say, and I don't think he meant anything. I think it was just sort of the pressure of the moment. He wanted to be optimistic, but of course what he was referring to was everybody saw how Parham's hands and arms kind of appeared to be shaking as he was coming off the field. I can tell you it was not because he was cold and he was shivering. When people have head injuries, there can be all kinds of abnormal electrical depolarization and discharge from the neurons in the brain, which can lead to abnormal movements, sort of how we see that abnormal posturing. Even after people pass out from something like a blood pressure problem, they can have abnormal movements as they sort of start to regain consciousness. The medical team, the paramedics that are out there, have the necessary supplies to help take care of him, and whatever the cause of this may be, whatever could be going on, whether or not it's seizures or something else. The most important thing is making sure the athlete doesn't go into cardiac arrest in these types of situations. The disability, the neurologic stuff always comes secondary after you've made sure that they're not in cardiac arrest. So other than saying this isn't from shivering being cold, there's really nothing else that you can assume or really say here about prognosis, what exactly all this means going forward, other than it definitely is concerning to watch. You have to applaud the medical team that was out there and got to him quickly, helped stabilize the neck, the paramedics that came out there as quickly as possible to administer that life support if needed. This is something that genuinely is tough to see. This is also more evidence of how serious you have to take head injuries, because you can't tell just by looking at the hit, looking at whether or not it was helmet to helmet, how bad things could potentially be. In general, with concussions, the longer the duration of loss of consciousness, of course, if there is something like a bleed in the head or anything like that, those can have worse prognosis long-term, but it's way too early to say any of that in this case, and so we just have to really say a prayer for him and hope for the best. Let me finish by acknowledging that I always struggle with the right way to cover these types of events when they happen. I know I've covered athletes who have passed away because I think sometimes there are really important things to learn from and discuss with these situations, as scary as they might be. Usually it's these types of things though that truly stick with us in terms of what we learn and what we actually remember. And when we see a clear example of what can happen after even what looks like just a mild concussion, I think it's important to still point that out so that we can all have a better sense of what this sport involves in terms of the risks, what can happen when people get out there on the field, and just truly have a better understanding of concussions and these types of medical things in general. That's it for the video. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.